Price changes for electricity are about to cast a shadow on San Diego's fast-growing solar energy market. In spite of Sheriff Gore's policies, more people could be packing heat in public places. A federal court may side with a San Diego man over concealed weapon permits. And a high school in Linda Vista enjoys great success with its novel approach for English learners. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, our reporter Lisa Halverstad of Voice of San Diego.
Hi,
Lisa.
Mark.
Good to see you back. Christina Davis, who covers crime and public safety for the San Diego Union Tribune. Hi, Christina.
Hi, Mark.
Glad you're here today. And education reporter Mario Coran of Voice of San Diego. Hey, Mario.
Hey, Mark.
Well, there's no holiday for the California Public Utilities Commission. The oversight agency is set to vote today on new rate structures. Both plans on the table will raise electricity rates for consumers here and across the state, and the new rates figure to put a serious damper on the fast-growing solar energy industry. As of this taping, the CPUC has yet to decide, but Lisa, start with the reason behind the push to change this whole old tier system.
Well, a couple years ago, some legislation passed known as AB 327, and the point of that legislation was to stop the kind of current rate structure which has the high energy users subsidizing the low energy users. So before or after the energy crisis, they added some tiers. So there used to just be 2 tiers of energy use. Now there are 4, and there's a really big gulf between them. So the lowest usage tier is 17 cents per kilowatt hour, and the highest for SDG&E is 42 cents per kilowatt hour.
I mean, it's quite a gulf.
It is quite a gulf. And so the argument has been that, well, after the energy crisis, they actually capped those lowest tiers so that there couldn't be increases for them. All of the increases would go to the top energy users. And so the argument has been that these folks who are using more energy are kind of helping out those at the lower end and paying a lot more maybe than they should.
Okay, and this goes back 15 years, back to the energy crisis in 2001.
Yes.
And it's been in place. So it's time to change it. Everybody kind of agrees on that. So there's 2, as I said at the open, 2 competing proposals. Briefly outline what we're talking about here.
So
Although they're changing every moment, I know.
Yes, they are changing every moment, so I'll give just a brief overview
Okay.
here. So both of the proposals would take from 4 tiers, like I talked about, to 2 to 3 tiers. And rather than having that huge gulf that I talked about, there would just be a 20%, or closer to a 25 is the latest update, 25% differential, or a 33% differential between the 2 different tiers. And the point of that is that there would be less of a gulf between the 2, but there are maybe some consequences of that beyond just regular ratepayers being affected.
Right, and that segues nicely into my next question, because it has a big impact, as we said earlier, on the solar energy industry. How so?
Well, right now, really high energy users have a pretty big incentive to go solar. What they can do by going solar is offset that high energy usage and really save a lot on their bills, and we'll probably talk about how that works more later. Right. But if the tiers are closer together, solar may not pencil out as well financially for some folks. The decision to go solar now is as much an environmental one as it is a financial one. A lot of people see it as a way to save money. And so if the 2 tiers are closer together, if there's less of a differential, some people really may need to be shown that this is still going to make financial sense for them, and they're going to pay off that upfront cost of going solar in a time that they feel comfortable with.
Right, and we will get into that a bit later, but I wanted to ask, what do environmentalists say about the changing the rate structure here, the way it's being proposed?
Well, they're concerned that that basically the current structure actually incentivizes conservation, and that this new one would actually reward people that some folks might refer to as energy hogs, and really not kind of allow and push for that conservation that they feel is so important.
All right, we've got a bite here from Dan Jacobson, Environment California. He talks about these policies that make installing solar panels sensible as it is. Let's hear that.
Policies that do away with fees, policies that streamline permitting, policies that make it easier to sell your excess energy back into the grid. These are the kind of programs that when homeowners and people who live in affordable housing units like this can do the math and do the numbers, solar makes so much sense.
All right, and this rate structure we're talking about, that's not the only thing that might impact the solar industry here. Talk about some other things that are changing in the short time to come here by the end of the year that can impact this.
Well, that same legislation that we talked about, AB 327, it also called for a different billing arrangement for solar customers. So right now, if you have solar panels on your roof, you can sign up for a program called net energy metering. And basically what that allows you to do is suddenly you're selling to the power company too. So you're getting credit for the energy that you're producing with your solar panels. And if you actually produce more than you need in a year, you get a small amount back in addition to that, back from the utility. So that's really what makes going solar such a good financial deal for a lot of people.
The no-brainer is
it's a no-brainer. If you're going to get your payments back, you're going to see major reductions in your energy bills. You may even offset your bill entirely. And along with one point on the rate structure that's related to that is the proposals would have a minimum bill that's set too. And that would be a big deal for solar customers because some of them are completely offsetting their bill as it is. So if there's a minimum bill, that would add to their cost that they have on their monthly energy bill, though they do pay those in a year term. The other thing that's changing likely soon is right now there's a federal tax incentive that offers people who buy their solar panels up front or get a loan to do so to get up to 30% off the cost of going solar, even within the first year that they've done it.
They just take it right off their taxes.
Right off their
taxes.
Pay that tax. Yes,
yeah.
As long as they make enough money, they pay enough in taxes. And right now it's a huge financial boon for a lot of people. One gentleman I talked to, within the first year, he got $4,800 back. So that was in addition to the savings associated with net energy metering he banked.
Well, let me ask you too. I don't know if you're homeowners or rent, or it doesn't really matter. If you were looking at, say, 7, 8, 10 years to pay off your investment in solar versus 3 or 4, I mean, it's a huge deal, right?
Yeah, I'm actually in the process of buying a house right now, and solar seems so attractive. My parents just got it. But yeah, I think it would definitely matter is if it's going to take me 10 years to pay this off, I think it's a pretty good chunk of change, right, to put solar in.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that would definitely be weighing on my mind because there's a lot of other bills that go with being a homeowner.
All right, we got a few seconds left on this. I did want to ask you, the panels themselves have gotten much cheaper in recent years. Does that offset these subsidies, for lack of a better umbrella term, that are going away, or have they not gotten that much cheaper? It's still gonna put a damper on the solar industry if all this stuff happens, right?
Well, there's still certainly been a major reduction in the cost associated with going solar, but it's still a pretty hefty upfront investment. We're still talking, I've heard estimates of between maybe $15,000 and $24,000, sometimes even more. It really depends on the size of your system. But the way that it's set up now with net energy metering, with this tax credit, and with the current rate structure, you get that payoff much more quickly than you otherwise would. So one point I want to make sure that I make for people who might be thinking about going solar now is that net energy metering structure. It is, if you were to decide to get solar panels within probably the next year or so, you would be able to still benefit from that arrangement for 20 years. The folks that sign on will be grandfathered in. It's just that once the region hits this cap, which is 5% of basically the utility's power structure coming from solar, that's when all of a sudden it's cut off. So we really don't know when that date is, but a lot of people are saying, probably sometime in mid-2016.
I did want to ask you too. You interviewed some folks who are in the solar industry, install these projects and these plans at homes and at businesses. What do they have to say about all of this?
Well, a lot of them are saying go solar now because right now we have certainty. We know what the deal is going to be. We know what your payoff is going to be. There is going to be a new net energy metering structure, but it's probably not going to be as sweet as it is right now. So again, the message that they have is if you go with it now, there's certainty. It may not be so bad later on, but we just don't know yet.
All right, well, we'll be looking for you following up and covering that, especially on what the CPUC does here. All right, what does it take to get a permit to pack heat? Is it enough to simply say you need a gun for self-defense to get a concealed weapon permit? That's the question federal judges are weighing in a case with the San Diego roots. It's a case being closely watched around the nation. And Christina, start by telling us who this part-time resident is and how this whole thing originated here in San Diego.
So his name is Edward Peruta. He owns a freelance, independent video news service. And he's a part-time San Diego resident, so he lives here in a motorhome when he's here, but he also lives in Connecticut and Florida. So he tried to get a concealed weapons permit from the Sheriff's Department here in San Diego, and for various reasons they denied him a permit. And so he filed a lawsuit saying that his constitutional rights are being denied because he doesn't have the right to, be ready at a moment's notice to defend himself with a gun if he needed to be.
All right, so that's the crux of his argument, that for whatever reason, I just don't feel safe out in malls and movie palaces and all public places, ballparks, so I should be able to, just because I don't feel safe, carry a permit. And there's a restriction on that in San Diego County, right?
That's right. So in the state of California, we've given the powers to who gets concealed weapons permits to all of the local sheriffs. And so the sheriffs are all going to treat it a little differently depending on where you are in the state. In San Diego for years, as long as I can remember, the criteria has been pretty strict, and it's the same in a lot of the other big cities too in California. And basically, you can't be a felon, and you have to have a very specific threat usually that you have to say is why you need a gun. So if you just go to the Sheriff's Department and say, I feel unsafe and I feel like I should have a gun, that's not going to fly.
Not going to happen.
You need to basically say,
somebody's stalking
my ex-boyfriend's stalking me,
okay.
Here's the letters, here's the proof, he's been arrested, or I'm a diamond dealer and I'm driving around with $1 million of diamonds all the time and I'm a huge victim for a target for robbery.
So what the sheriff would consider one good, reasonable reason. All right, we do have a bite here. Let's hear from the attorney from Mr. Peruta and see what he has to say.
His initial application actually was for the fact that he was a journalist and that he did live here and that he had a number of other permits from other states and should be allowed to carry a firearm here. And he was turned down. He thought that that should not have been a proper denial of his application. So since he spent so much time here, why wouldn't he be able to have a concealed weapons permit here? Why does he have to show that he's the victim of a crime, wait to have that happen before then being allowed to have a permit in San Diego?
All right, you're all journalists here. Do you need a concealed weapon permit to do your job? And it seems to be his argument.
I never thought to apply for one, and I covered public safety in Arizona, as Christina did too.
Okay. All right, I want to get into the Ninth Circuit a little bit here. Give us the high points of the course of this case. So we had a ruling, and it was just a 3-judge panel, and now we go en banc, which is the whole panel's going to hear it. So catch us up on that.
Right. So about more than a year ago, the case went before the Ninth Circuit, just a 3-judge panel, which is how most cases are heard. And in February 2014 is when that opinion came back. And in a 2-to-1 decision, they did decide that the Sheriff's Department's policies were unconstitutional, that people shouldn't need a specific good cause to carry a firearm. Concealed. So we're talking about concealed firearms here, not open carry.
Right. So they ruled for Peruta.
They ruled for Peruta. Peruta and a lot of gun owners considered a victory.
And then how did the whole Ninth Circuit decide to take it on?
So the Ninth Circuit has a mechanism where the judges can kind of put the question out there amongst all the other judges in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals to see if any of the other judges think that the case should be reheard. It's kind of rare. It's done anonymously, and in this case, a judge said, I think that we all should hear that case.
And here we are.
And here we are. Yeah.
And as I said, it's being watched around the nation here. So the National Rifle Association supported Peruta. Who else were friends of the court in this case?
I mean, pretty much any gun rights organization you can think of has filed amicus briefs in favor of Peruta's case.
And some other states where concealed weapons are much looser.
Like a dozen states or something, including Texas, I think, and Louisiana, and a lot of other states. They filed a joint brief just saying that, hey, our residents enjoy all of these Second Amendment freedoms, and the moment that they cross the California state line, they shouldn't have to give up those reasons. So it's very interesting, and the whole country is really watching this, and no matter which way it goes, I mean, people are saying this could be the Supreme Court case that's going to decide this issue for the entire country.
Well, Sheriff Bill Gore certainly doesn't agree with Pruitt's side of it. Here's Robert Fagan. He's presenting the department's take on this matter.
Fortunately, our sheriff takes a very civic-minded approach to CCWs, and that is basically he understands that it's the legislature's job to pass the laws, and it's the judiciary's job to define them, and it's his job to enforce them. So he doesn't really have a dog in the fight. He's just looking for direction from the courts as to what good cause is.
All right, so what is the situation now with concealed carry permits? I mean, do you have any sense that give us a scope of how many folks have them and how easily they're obtained as the situation is now?
I don't have the number right in front of me on exactly how many people currently have CCWs under the old rules. I do know that about 2,000 people since that February 2014 ruling, about 2,000 people since have put in their applications, just kind of waiting and hoping the court rules in their favor, so they would then be processed to get applications under these permits under these new rules.
So if I did want to go get a permit, I'd be waiting.
You'd be waiting, basically.
An indefinite amount of time.
And you would be in line from the first person that put their application in, you know, on forward.
And any sense of who the folks are who tend to want to have these? I mean, maybe that's just for another story going forward, but
I think it's a large segment of cross-section of residents, I would say. But, you know, probably people who already own guns, I would assume.
So there was the open carry movement a few years ago, and people were carrying guns into Starbucks in Escondido and all. Are these cases similar? Are they all pushing the same envelope, as it were?
Yeah, well, and that was actually a huge question during the en banc hearing a few weeks ago that the judges really keyed in on. Because a few years ago, it was legal for you to carry an unloaded gun on your hip as long as it was open and visible. And that law has since changed. You're not allowed to do that in public places. I think if you're going camping in the mountains, you can do that. But if you're at the mall, you can't do that. That does not fly anymore. And so the judges were asking the lawyers in this case, okay, now in light of this new law, you can't carry unloaded open. You can't carry hidden, so you can't carry at all. Does that mean that your rights are being even more diminished? And should we change that or consider that? So that'll be really interesting to see what they say about that.
Mario?
Yeah, and this might be a tough question to answer, but I'm curious, does it sound like this gentleman has a legitimate case? I mean, it sounds kind of funny when you think about it. I mean, here's this man living in a mobile home. He's not a mobile home, an RV.
Like an RV, yeah.
Right, a part-time resident of San Diego. So is it a case where he's genuinely concerned about his safety, or is it more of like this journalist who knows the system, who wants to have a right because he wants to have a gun? Does that weigh in, or have you heard any thoughts on that?
I mean, it probably strikes me a little bit both ways. I think anyone who is an advocate for being able to carry a concealed weapon would say, I have a legitimate case because the Constitution affords me this right.
And of course, he did win the 2-1 already.
He did, and it boils down to that basic argument that I think a lot of people would say. Now, I should point out that the Sheriff's Department here denied his CCW request on not just that ground, but one of the major factors was they said that he is not a full-time resident, and they wanted kind of a brick-and-mortar address for him, and he doesn't have that. He kind of lives here part-time in a mobile home, or I'm sorry, an RV. So they did cite that as one of their reasons. You know,
we'll see how that
whether
flies.
That should be considered or not, you know, I don't know.
All right, well, we're going to move on, but we'll be watching for more reporting and see exactly how the Ninth Circuit comes down on this, and maybe eventually the Supreme Court. Well, high school students who speak very little English are typically placed in a special class for English learners. Sometimes they spend years there before finally getting classes that count toward graduation. But not at Kearney High in Linda Vista. And Mari, you begin your story with a student named Angel, if that's how we're pronouncing his name. He actually used sign language to communicate with teachers at the beginning because he spoke so little English. And tell us a little bit about him and what happened to him at Kearney High.
Sure. So as I understand it, a student came from Mexico, had no language skills, had no skills in English when he got there. And they go through sort of an intake process when they first arrive at the school. So he met with the principal, and that's the way I understand it. I mean, he was sort of using sign language, and I think the principal spoke Spanish, or somebody there on staff spoke Spanish, and was able to tell him he was going to be in class. And he was going to be in class with English learners. He wasn't going to be in any sort of special classes, and he didn't like it. You know, he thought that was like the cruelest thing you could do to a kid.
Yeah, drop him in, and he doesn't speak a word of the language. Yeah.
Right. But the principal there, her name is Ana Diaz-Buz, and she just—I don't know how she knows. Maybe it's a talent that she has, but she just knew this kid would do all right, and she knew that the system that she had set up and the teacher that was going to be teaching him was going to be able to handle him. And sure enough, you know, within a month, he had picked up some language skills, and then in a year, he was in AP classes, and then he went on to take college classes while he was still in high school.
So he really is emblematic of the story that you told, and the theme in your story. So these English as second language, ESL classes, they're called ESL ghettos sometimes by people. What's the problem with them?
Well, I think the problem with them is that, and this is a contentious topic in terms of how to best help students who are learning English. And I think the central tension is, how do you teach them English at the same time that you're teaching them the content that they need to learn in class? So with the ESL ghettos, which is sort of a pejorative,
yes.
We wouldn't want to call them that within school.
But that's how scornful some people are toward these things.
Right. I mean, it's basically a class where a student sits with other students who are learning English and practices the language for, you know, multiple hours a day.
And the rest of their studies go on hold at that point. They just focus on the English. Huh?
Right. And so yeah, they're learning language until they can pass a test that says they've become fluent. But until then, I mean, they're missing the credits they need for graduation.
So what at Kearney High? Why are they doing something differently, and how's it working out for them?
Right. So at Kearney High, what they've done is they've sort of I think one of the most problematic and also the most common ways of teaching English learners, apart from the separate language classes that we're talking about, is just sort of throwing kids in the class, sink or swim. I mean, a lot of times that's not an effective way to learn a language either. So what they've done in the classes is they've set up mainstream classes where the kids are still learning the content that they'll need for graduation. But they're really designing the class around those students, and the teachers know who they are. They're thinking of those students in particular, and thinking of how they can design the lesson, design the curriculum with a lot of visuals.
So adding a lot of support to these kids that they are mainstreaming in these English speaking classes.
Right, it's mainstream with a lot of support.
Okay, and how many students are still struggling after years to learn English in San Diego Unified schools? How are they doing academically?
Yeah, so the most recent count I've seen is around 6,000 students who are in who are what they call long-term English learners.
District-wide in San Diego
District-wide, right? Yeah. Which means they've been in district schools for 6 or more years and still aren't considered fluent. And I mean, the number might sound small or might sound large, but when you think about that's really striking to me, that a student can be in school for 6 years and their main job academically is to learn that language, and they still don't learn that. I mean, that's a problem with the system that's set up around them.
Yeah, something's not working. And the principals there, as you mentioned, Anna, and there's Cheryl Hiblin, of course, is another principal there at Kearney, and they just decided this approach isn't working, we're going to try something else.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a little bit of a process to find out what didn't work and what did work. I mean, they've found success over time through tweaks and improvements.
And tell us about Kearney itself. It's got a different organization, different structure than a typical high school in San Diego.
Sure,
right?
yeah. So Kearney is what's known as a small schools model. So it was at one time a large high school, hadn't been doing so well, had been struggling, same problems that you'd see in any American urban high school, right? So what they did is they broke that school into 4 small schools, right? Each one around a theme. I can't remember off the top of my head what the themes are there, at Kearney, but it's basically in a smaller environment. The students have more time to get to know other students. They have more time to get to know their teachers, and it's a more personalized environment.
And for these English learners, they're able to provide this kind of support you described earlier.
Yeah, and it seemed to work for them there. I mean, it's been tried, and it hasn't been successful in other schools, but Kearney is an exception.
All right, we got just a little time left. What happens when these principals from Kearney go to the administrators at large in the district and say, hey, this is working, why don't you try it?
That's a great question, Mark. And I'll tell you that what's been most surprising to me after writing the story about the success that these kids are finding at this school, I would think that other principals or other teachers from other schools would want to replicate some of that, would want to see what's working. But I've gotten a lot of angry emails, and a lot of people reached out to me to debunk the success that they've had at Kearney. So I think, in going back to something that Cheryl Hiblin, that one of the principals there, said in the story, is that there's a lot of resistance just in terms of changing tradition. You know, people are so used to doing things a certain way that when you lay this thing in front of them that's
they get
different,
threatened and it's not going to work. Well, we'll look for some follow-up reporting on that. It's a fascinating story. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Lisa Halverstad of Voice of San Diego, Christina Davis of the San Diego Union Tribune, and Mario Coran, also of Voice of San Diego. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.